I got up from my chair at my own daughter's graduation dinner and said the only thing I could think to say. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't rehearsed it. But when I looked down the table and saw my father sitting there with his hands folded in his lap, shoulders hunched slightly forward, not eating, not talking, just absorbing it, something in my chest snapped into place. I said what I said, and then I walked out. What happened over the next 3 weeks changed things I didn't even know were still changeable. My father's name is Howard Brock. Most people who meet him assume he's a retired shop teacher. He got the hands for it. Wide palms, a few old scars. The kind of calluses that never fully disappear even after you stop using them. He drives a 2009 Ford F-150 that he keeps spotless. He owns the same flannel shirt in 3 colors. He says, yep, instead of yes, folks instead of people. And he has never once in his life talked about money. Not out of embarrassment, but because, as I understand now, it genuinely doesn't interest him as a subject. My mother died when I was 14. After that, it was just the 2 of us in the house in Dayton, Ohio, and somehow my father made everything feel like enough. I didn't have the sneakers other kids had. I skipped the 8th grade class trip to Washington, D.C., but I never went hungry, and I always had what I needed for school. Every Sunday, he made the same pot roast he'd been making since before I was born, and we ate it at the kitchen table with the window cracked open even in January, because he liked the sound of the street. I never asked where the money came from during the lean stretches. I never asked why we didn't see his side of the family. He was good at deflecting, a joke, a subject change, something about the radio. I learned not to push. I put myself through Ohio State on loans and a partial scholarship, got a civil engineering degree, and moved to Charlotte to build a life. I met a woman named Sylvia at 29 and married her at 32. My father drove up from Dayton for the wedding in that same truck, wore a Navy suit he'd owned since 1994, and danced with Sylvia's mother at the reception. Everyone loved him. That was the version of my life I thought I understood. My daughter Eleanor arrived 18 months after the wedding. She's 31 now, which means I've spent 31 years watching her become herself. And it still surprises me sometimes how entirely her own person she turned out to be. She studied architecture, inherited her mother's sharpness and my father's patience. A rare combination. She finished her master's at Penn last spring, and her fiancé's family insisted on a celebratory dinner. Her fiancé is Griffin Alderman, 33, works in private equity. He's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. But he comes from a certain kind of family, one with a certain way of seeing the world, and that way of seeing the world had never had. To make room for someone like my father. Griffin's mother, Loretta Alderman, is 62, very thin, with the kind of hairstyle that probably costs $400 to maintain and a posture. That suggests she once read somewhere that good posture signals authority and never stop performing it. His father, Prescott, he prefers, since apparently Prescott sounds dated, made his money in commercial real estate in the 90s and has since moved into what he calls strategic investment partnerships, which as far as I can tell means sitting on boards and playing golf. I met them twice before, once at the engagement brunch at their Villanova house, which looked like a European hotel lobby, and once at a fundraiser in downtown Philadelphia. Both times pleasant enough. Both times I sensed something underneath the pleasantness. The careful friendliness of people who've already sorted you into a category and are managing around it. My father flew in for the dinner. He almost never flies, usually drives anywhere within 800 miles. But Eleanor asked, and my father would cross a desert for Eleanor. I picked him up at PHL. He came through arrivals in his flannel shirt, carrying a duffel bag that looked like it dated to the Clinton administration, shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug. "Proud of your girl," he said. On the drive to the hotel, he looked at the lobby and said, "This place is too nice. It's fine, Pop. Looks like a movie set. It's just a hotel." He shrugged. That's my father. He never argues. He registers the observation and lets it go. The dinner was at a restaurant in Center City that I found out later required a reservation 2 months out. Loretta had picked it. We had a private room, A long table, low light, a server assigned just to us. 12 of us total. Eleanor and Griffin, Sylvia and me, my father, Griffin's parents, his sister Waverly and her husband Dean, and 2 college friends of Griffin's whose names I kept mixing up. My father sat beside me. He studied the menu for a long time. He didn't comment on the prices, but I watched his eyes travel down the page and land somewhere in the middle, which is what he does when he's recalibrating. Order what you want, I told him quietly. I'll have the chicken, he said. The appetizers arrived. Conversation drifted around the table. Eleanor's thesis, an upcoming Tuscany trip, Griffin's firm, Loretta's renovation on the New Hampshire lake house. My father ate his bread and listened. He's always been a good listener. Then Loretta turned to him with the smile of someone who has decided to be kind to a person she feels sorry for. So, Howard, she said, Griffin mentioned you're retired. What was it you did? Manufacturing. Oh, a beat. What kind? Industrial components. Parts for heavy equipment. Mostly. She nodded the way people nod when they're already moving on. Prez leaned in from down the table. Did you work for one of the big shops out there? Caterpillar's got a big presence in the Midwest. Not Caterpillar. Who then? My father took a sip of water. Small operation. Family thing. Prez nodded slowly, the nod of someone whose assumptions have just been confirmed, and went back to his fork. Loretta turned back to my father. Well, it's wonderful you could make the trip. Must be quite a change coming into the city. She meant it as a compliment. That's the thing about people like Loretta. They think they're being gracious, when really they're just reminding you what they think you are. My father smiled at her. Philadelphia's a fine city. Been here a few times. Have you? Yep. He left it there. He always leaves it there. It happened somewhere between the entrees and dessert. The wine had been flowing. I'd had 2 glasses, Sylvia more, Loretta plenty, and the table had gotten louder in the way tables do after 2 hours of eating. And drinking. Eleanor was glowing. She'd been glowing all night. This was her night, her achievement, her future taking shape in front of her. And she looked the way I imagine I looked at moments that mattered to me. Fully present and already remembering it at the same time. I was watching her when I heard it. Waverly was leaning toward Dean, speaking low, but not low enough. I don't know if she meant for anyone else to hear, or if she'd had enough wine not to care. But I heard it. So did Sylvia. And 2 seconds later, from the stillness that came over his face, so did my father. Is that seriously what he showed up in? She said. God. I mean, Eleanor seems great, but her family is just, I don't know. They're just not our kind of people. Dean muttered something I couldn't catch. The grandfather especially, Waverly went on. He looks like he wandered in from a hardware store. Then, and this is the part I'll remember for the rest of my life, Loretta glanced over, caught the tail end of it, and didn't correct her daughter. Didn't say a word. She just looked at my father for half a second with an expression I can only call agreement, and then looked away. I felt Sylvia's hand land on my arm under the table. I looked at my father. He was staring at his plate, jaw set, doing the thing he's always done, taking it, letting it pass through him, refusing to be disturbed by things that would make other people flip a table. He'd spent his whole life doing that, and I'd spent my whole life watching him do it and calling it strength. Sitting there, I understood for the first time that it wasn't only strength. It was something he'd been carrying by himself for a very long time. I moved Sylvia's hand off my arm as gently as I could, set my napkin down, and pushed back my chair. The table went quiet. I need to say something, I said. I don't remember it word for word, and I've tried since. What I know is I looked at Waverly, then at Loretta, and said something like, My father raised me alone after my mother died. He worked every day of his adult life. He'd driven 16 hours round trip to watch my daughter graduate when he didn't have to. In whatever box they'd put him in the moment he walked through the door. The shirt, the hands, the truck, the accent. They were wrong, and they owed him an apology. Nobody said anything. Loretta opened her mouth and closed it again. Waverly stared at the table. I looked at Griffin, his expression somewhere between respect and paralysis. Then I looked at Eleanor. Her eyes were wet. She gave me the smallest nod, like she was letting me go. Pop, I said. Let's go. My father folded his napkin, set it beside his plate, said, "Thank you for dinner," to no one in particular, which I've always admired about him. The ability to stay courteous even when nobody's extending him any, and stood up. We walked out. Sylvia caught us in the lobby with both our coats. Eleanor texted from the table, "I'll call you in the morning. I love you both." We stood outside on Walnut Street for a minute. The city doing what it does on a Thursday night. Moving, lit up and different. My father buttoned his coat, looked up at the street. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yeah, I did." He was quiet a moment. "Good dinner, though. Chicken was real good." Sylvia laughed. "I didn't, but I wanted to." I drove it back to the hotel. Sylvia went up first, and my father and I sat in the lobby for a while. Just the two of us, the way we used to sit at the kitchen table in Dayton on nights I couldn't sleep. He ordered coffee at nearly 10 at night, because caffeine has never once touched him. We didn't talk about dinner directly. We talked about Eleanor's thesis project, which he'd seen photos of and had structural opinions on. We talked about whether the truck needed new tires. We talked about a neighbor's addition he thought was being built wrong. Then, out of nowhere, "I want to show you something." He went up and came back with his duffel bag, sat beside me, and pulled out a thick manila folder, which he set on the coffee table. "What is this?" He looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize. Not quite nervous, not quite proud. More like someone who's held a door shut for years and finally decided to open it. "I haven't told you everything about the business," he said. "I'll try to tell it the way he told me." Because he didn't lead with a number, that matters. He started from the beginning, which is the only way he knows how to tell a story, which is probably why it took him past midnight to finish. He'd started the business in 1987 with $11,000 saved from machine shop job. Brock Industrial Supply. Ran it out of a garage for the first 3 years, 2 clients, 16-hour days, and somehow he was still home for dinner and there every morning, I remember. I just never understood what he was doing out in that garage until midnight. By 1995, he had 22 employees and a small warehouse, and had moved into agricultural equipment components, which turned out to be the right call, since that market held up better than automotive through the Midwest. By 2001, the year I started at Ohio State, the company was clearing just over $4 million a year. I stared at him. He held up a hand. Not finished yet. He'd kept it private on purpose. Not to hide anything, but because he'd watched what money did to families. His own father had come into money in the 70s, and it tore his side of the family apart. Who got what? Who deserved more? Who'd been slighted? He didn't want that, and he especially didn't want it near me. He wanted me to build my own life out of my own effort, to know what it felt like to earn something without a number sitting in the background warping every decision. So he kept living the way he always had. Same house, same kind of truck, same pot roast on Sundays. He gave to his church. He gave anonymously to a food bank in Montgomery County he'd supported for almost 20 years. He'd had the same financial advisor, a man named Clifford, since 1998. I vaguely remembered the name from a mention back in my college years, and hadn't thought about it since. In 2019, he sold Brock Industrial Supply to a regional manufacturing conglomerate. He handed me a single page from the folder, a summary sheet from the sale. I read the number, read it again, set the page down, and looked at him. He was watching me with those steady gray eyes, waiting. "Pop, yeah. Why are you showing me this now?" He thought about it. "Because I think you need to know that what happened tonight, what those people think of me, it doesn't change anything. I'm not showing you this because I'm angry. I'm showing you because I want you to understand I've always been fine. More than fine. I just chose different things." The number on the page was $43 million. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Sylvia in the dark and thought about everything I thought I knew about my own life, and how much of it needed to be reconsidered. The school trip I skipped, the sneakers, the loans I spent years paying down a little at a time. It never once occurred to me to ask my father for help, because it never occurred to me he'd have anything to give. And I realized that was exactly what he'd wanted. He'd built something enormous, and then deliberately stepped to the side of it so I couldn't be sheltered by it, so I'd have to become someone on my own terms. I thought about Loretta and Waverly in their quiet contempt at dinner, and about the way my father had folded his napkin and thanked a room that hadn't earned it, and meant it, or at least meant the gesture. And I understood, finally, that he could do that because he knew something they didn't. He wasn't absorbing their contempt out of powerlessness. He was absorbing it because it was genuinely beneath him. Eleanor called in the morning. She'd been up most of the night. She said, talking it through with Griffin. She loved him, she told me. But what happened at dinner had confirmed things she'd been avoiding thinking about too hard. His family's reaction, not just Waverly, but Loretta's silence, the fact that no one at that table said a word in my father's defense except me. Told her something she needed to know. Eleanor, this is your life. Your engagement, your call. I know. I've made it. She'd given Griffin the ring back that morning. There was a silence on the line. Are you okay? I'm going to be. Honestly, Dad, I feel relieved. Is that terrible? No. I keep thinking about Grandpa sitting there and nobody saying anything, and you standing up. That's what I want. Someone who does that. I think that's what I've been missing. I told her to come to breakfast. Grandpa was still around until early afternoon, and would probably rather eat somewhere that didn't need a 2-month reservation. She actually laughed at that, and it sounded real. My father left Philadelphia at noon. I walked him to his rental car, duffel bag over one shoulder, lobby coffee in hand, looking exactly like himself, not performing anything, not bracing for anything. I told him I'd been turning over everything he'd shown me the night before, and that I didn't know whether to be amazed or angry, that he'd kept it from me for 30 years. How about neither, he said. What then? Grateful. You built something real. You know it's real because you built it without knowing what was behind you. That's not nothing. That's everything. I didn't have an answer for that. I'm not sure there was one. He set his coffee on the roof of the car and hugged me. Held on a second longer than I expected, same as always. Then got in, rolled down the window. Tell Eleanor I love her. I will. And tell her the chicken really was good. I watched him pull out of the parking structure and disappear down the ramp. It's been 4 months since that dinner. Eleanor's back in Philadelphia, working at a firm in Old City, living somewhere she loves. And she seems lighter in a way I can see clearly, but couldn't quite name. She texts my father more than she texts me. He writes back in full sentences, no abbreviations, slightly formal. Exactly how he's always written, which Eleanor says she finds oddly comforting. The Aldermans reached out once. Loretta emailed a week after the dinner. Something carefully worded about how the evening had gotten away from everyone, and how she hoped it wouldn't affect the family going forward. I wrote back 2 sentences, thanked her for reaching out, wished her family well, and left it there because there wasn't anything else that needed saying. I told Sylvia about my father's money, or really about the fact of it, which is different from the money itself. She was quiet a while, then said, "You know what's funny? I always liked him more than your net worth suggested I should." Which is exactly the kind of thing Sylvia says, and exactly why I married her. I've started calling my father every Sunday evening now, instead of every other week or so, which is the natural drift between adult children and their parents. He's never commented on the change in frequency. He just picks up on the second ring, usually while he's doing dishes after the pot roast. A few weeks ago, I asked him why he never told me any of it. He went quiet for a moment, the way he does when he's actually thinking, not just preparing an answer, and said, "You know how you want your kid to know they're going to be okay, but you also know if you tell them too soon, they stop trying to figure it out for themselves." Yeah, that's all it was. And I thought about my daughter, and about whoever she eventually chooses, and about all the Sunday evenings ahead of me, sitting in my kitchen with the window cracked open, calling my father, talking about nothing in particular, and it being exactly enough. That's what I came back to that night in Philadelphia. Before the folder, before the number, before any of it. I stood up from that table because he's my father, and because some things don't need a reason beyond that. They never did.